Hello, everybody. This is Catholic Dad, episode number 260. More on disobedience and obedience and the SSPX, the Society Pius X. Well, anyway, so I've been talking about, all the wonkiness that goes on in the church. And it's been going on since the time of Christ, since Judas and St. Peter denied Christ 3 times, that there's always been people in the church that have done things that, like the average parishioner wouldn't think were good. And, you could be, you're called to be a loyal son or daughter of the church. And when is the time to step up and tell the church that they have to get their house in order? Because, St. Paul said the church shall be filled with hypocrites, do as they say, not as they do. Like, how long do you watch the church do wonky things and just remain quietly obedient instead of stepping up and saying, listen, you're actually doing intrinsically evil acts, and you probably shouldn't be doing that. And so I've developed several principles in the last couple of videos about when it's time to step up and actually do something. Number one is if they ask me to do something intrinsically evil against God's law, like if the church actually commanded something that was improper. I don't know, murder or stealing or fornication, you name it. I don't even know. But you get my point. It's kind of like in military battle when somebody tells you to go and kill an enemy refugee when you're not engaged in battle. That would be something that you should be disobedient to. And so, and a lot of times in war, that doesn't happen. People are just blindly obedient to the people giving orders, which shouldn't be, because you still have to follow God's law. And then the second principle was that if the church did something that was completely heretical against the dogmatic doctrinal teachings of the church, like they said the Holy Eucharist is no longer the Holy Eucharist, or you no longer need penance, or whatever else, like if they actually went against 2,000 years of Christian teaching, that perhaps maybe that's the time, which I don't even know if that's the time or not. I'm not certain. Because a lot of people have a different metric about what's against doctrinal teaching and what's not. But I wanted to talk about the Society Pius X for a second. I took some time and I reread the papal bull Ecclesia Dei by St. John Paul II in 1988. And it was very specific when he excommunicated Lefebvre and Etal, the remainder of the bishops, Williamson, and the other guys. He didn't mince words. He said, yeah, they're excommunicated. That's what they are. And then he went on to say, and those who are attached to the society in any way, if you don't come back to the Vicar of Christ and the Holy Roman Catholic Church, that's a grave offense against God for which you could be excommunicated against. And so that's an act of disobedience. And so, when the Supreme Pontiff says, hey, by the way, your bishops are excommunicating for being disobedient. Oh, by the way, if you follow them, that's a grave offense against God, of which you could be excommunicated for. If you continue to do that, that's an act of disobedience that I think needs to be addressed. And so, and anybody in the SSPX, if I'm making you mad right now, oh well, too bad. Go read Ecclesia Dei and then decide for yourself on that one, because that one is very specific. It's not like there's any ambiguity in that papal bull at all. But all that being said is, I think you could be disobedient when they ask you to do intrinsically evil acts, which I don't think the church has ever done for anybody, or when it asks you to accept something against doctrinal or dogmatic positions of the church. You can actually refuse to agree with that, I would think. I'm not a great theologian, but the one time I don't think you can be disobedient is when the magisterium, the living magisterium, actually steps up and says, don't be disobedient. Like they actually say, hey, enough with the saber rattling. You're doing enough, resistance within the church. We hear you loud and clear, but by the way, you're out of lines now and you're no longer an obedient son of the church. Stop it. I think when you get to that point, you better adhere to obedience. Otherwise, you become Martin Luther, you become John Calvin, you become Henry VIII. You could become, all the people that walked out of the church and divided Christianity through schism. That's when you become a schismatic, when you essentially do not recognize the authority of the living magisterium. If you don't recognize that, you're schismatic, and that's a grave offense against God. And so, in terms of obedience, what you need to do is you gotta realize, yeah, you can saber rattle inside the church. You can actually yell when the magisterium's corrupt, and for sure it's been corrupt numerous times throughout the history of the church. And you should probably give some resistance and say, you need to correct your ways, you're in error. But when the living magisterium actually steps up and says, enough of the saber rattling, you are now pushing so hard that you're going to be in schism, you probably should get in line with the church, because if you say, well, no, I'm not going to get in line with the church and I'm going to leave the church, essentially you're undoing the promise that Christ gave us, that hell will not prevail over his church, that even all the weirdness in the church and all the wonkiness in the church of, the failures of the church, that it's still being watched over by the Holy Spirit, and it is still the living magisterium, and hell will not prevail over it. And if you decide that your pride is so much bigger than that, that you're going to actually leave the church and schism against the Holy Pontiff, then that's a point where you probably shouldn't go. And so I'd invite all the SSPXers out there, by the way. I think you guys have wonderful liturgical norms and whatever else, and you've taught me a lot about the church itself. I'd like you to read Ecclesia Dei and meditate about that, because that's pretty impressive. It's a papal bull, it's an infallible document, and it places you in a very precarious position theologically and with regards to the magisterium, that following such societies, as St. John Paul II said, is a grave offense against God. And that should bother you if you believe in the Holy Roman Catholic Church, because that could lead to hell. And so this is Catholic Dad, making you think about it. Like or subscribe, get the Mass, and pray the daily rosary. God bless you all.